Hello there, friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and today we are going to be talking about the full moon in Virgo 3. I am joined by my good friend Jared, aka Mercurius George, making a in-person visible appearance today. The fellow behind the avatar is present. So how you doing today, Jared?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I'm excited to talk with you. Jared and I have been friends for over a decade, which is pretty. It's kind of blowing my mind just thinking about it. Um,
Yeah, I think 14 years actually.
14 years. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Fellow Midwesterners,
Yep.
like or origins. So you're where are you located now, my friend?
I live in Brooklyn, New York.
All right. So you're an astrologer slash artist that is,
I
you
think you can
guys,
see. I think you
yeah,
can see what I do. It's all around me.
yeah. Jared and I met in the music scene in Michigan quite a few years ago, and always really respected his not only his artistic and musical ability, but his ability to contextualize myth and his exploration as far as some of the metaphysical things as well. I think that's actually where we connected on an even deeper level, was being able to talk through mythology and explore the secrets of the universe. So this is hopefully just a continuation of talks we've been having for over a decade and a half now, maybe, right?
Yep.
so,
Yep. And
so
now we
we're
just have them publicly.
yeah, which is exciting. Which is super exciting. I've been bugging Jared to get into astrology and be doing more of this work, and really excited to see your growth as far as that has gone. And um, he's got a great website also. So I wanted to welcome people in the chat here, and then we'll talk a little bit more about Jared's services and all where you can find them and all of that. So I'm welcoming some people here in digital land today. Place of Stillness is joining us from Sweden. Hello, my friend. Tarja T is here from Finland. We've got Erica coming here from Chicago. Another Tarja is here from Finland. We've got two Tarjas, dueling Tarjas today. Andrea is here from Croatia. Hello, my friend. Lynn McMillan's dropping in from Vermont, and Cookerzilla is here from Mahone Bay. Very cool. All right. So, yeah, if you're joining us, make sure you let us know where you're stopping in from. If you have any questions over the course of our talk today, feel free to put it in the chat box, and we will do our best to break it down and to, interact with all of you. I always love the contributions from the people that stop by. So, Jared, aka Mercurius George, tell us more about your journey with astrology and divination, and some of the things that you are getting excited about recently, and where we can find all of your wonderful services.
Yeah. So I have this silly moniker or pseudonym that I use, Mercurius George, which really just started as a Twitter handle, and it has become sort of more than I ever intended it to be. But I've been interested in astrology since around the time I met you, which was, I think, 2007, 2008. And, I've always had a kind of casual but enthusiastic interest, and a sense that it has some sort of incredible power, which I also have always felt. I've always had mixed feelings about. It's always been very sort of unsettling to me. But so I have a very divided psyche in my relationship to sort of esoteric and mystical things. But usually the esoteric wins these battles, is what I've found. You
After
have,
your Black Panther experience, right?
yeah. So I just lots of experiences that have pulled me further and deeper into these worlds. Sometimes despite my resistance. And you know, I've always been lucky to have you as a guide. I think it's no surprise that I believe your Jupiter is conjunct my ascendant.
It is, exactly.
Pretty much says it all.
Yeah.
So, and to be honest, like, if I were on a different show or podcast or whatever, and to introduce how I got into astrology, I'd have a different story. But since I'm talking to you, I mean, so much of it has been through you and having conversations with you, and you, like, whenever you discovered something new that you were excited about with astrology, we tended to talk about it. And so, that went on over the years, but particularly when you discovered Hellenistic astrology,
Mhm.
I've never seen anybody more enthusiastic and excited about anything than you were in that time period. And um, it was very contagious. And, you told me about the astrology podcast. I started listening to it. Um, and I just got pulled in. And I started taking classes with Austin Coppock. Started connecting with people online, which had already begun kind of, but or I don't remember the timeline exactly, but I had just had so much going on in my head with astrology that I needed an outlet for it. And so I got on Twitter, and I've since then become very connected with a lot of people through Twitter,
Right.
which I really never expected. And eventually I started doing readings. So all of this is a very long way of saying, like, yes, hi, I'm a person, I do astrology, and I do readings, and I'm available if you're interested. I have my practice is like a lot of people, primarily rooted in traditional astrology, which is can mean a lot of things. I guess I would say mostly Hellenistic, but not exclusively, and not. I don't draw any hard lines between traditions. And
Yeah.
and of course I've soaked up all the stuff that I like from the 20th century developments in psychological astrology.
Mm.
It's impossible for me to say that I'm not also a practitioner of psychological astrology,
Sure.
because of course I am.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. I think that, we keep talking on this channel about creating oracular space, and there's many different ways to do that, and it doesn't have to be, kind of black or white. There's a lot of gray areas surrounding it as well, isn't there?
yeah. So
So,
that's about it.
Jared, where do we find you and your readings and offerings?
You can find me at my website, which is mercuriusgeorge.com. Since you're on YouTube, presumably you can
Mhm.
see how that's spelled. Uh, it's a little different. I dropped the O from curious, so it looks like some weird Latin word.
Mhm.
Um, and you can find me there. Basically, at this point, my readings are one size fits all, which is to say, entirely flexible to whatever it is that you're looking for. But really, I just do natal chart readings with transits incorporated as needed. So
Someday, I hope when these worlds get fully merged together, we'll be able to shout out from the rooftops about your music too, because
yeah,
Jared
but
is a
currently secret.
yeah. We still have to keep a small air of mystery, but I'll tell you, for all of you out there, this gentleman in front of us today is an incredible musician and quite an incredible orchestral arranger as well. I was
Thank you.
listening to one of your songs that you sent me about some of the themes we're going to talk about today with Pandora, and it's just really beautiful music. So we're in the presence of a really great artist, I think, and I just have a lot of respect for the work that you do in that area as well. So
That means a lot for
yeah,
me. Thank you so much. And if you're dying of curiosity, feel free to like send me a message or something. I'm not that secretive. I just like keeping my last name separate from my astrology, for various reasons.
yeah,
Mostly so that I can feel more liberated when I'm in this zone, when I'm in this kind of yeah, when I'm engaging with this, I don't want to hold back.
sure, yeah, it
Um,
makes sense.
and yeah, that's most of it.
Well, check out Jared at mercuriusgeorge.com. There's a link to his website in the description of this video or in the description of the audio if you're listening later. And yeah, it's great to get a new perspective from different astrologers. And like I said, Jared is very detailed about the work that he does. We share a similar inspiration with Austin Coppock and his work as well. So highly recommend. Um, so I have a few things coming up that I wanted to speak to before we kind of dive in. I have my Decans webinar of Aries coming up on April the 9th. So if you're curious about Aries and some of the myths, the fixed stars, all of the themes associated with that, learning how to incorporate tarot into your astrological practice as well. There is a link in the description of this video and this podcast for the Decans of Aries. You can also sign up for a spring bundle, which includes Aries, Taurus, and Gemini, and save an extra $10 off. I'm doing a special, an early bird special, until the 1st of April, where you can use the coupon code ARIES20 and save 20% off either the Aries Decan or the spring bundle. Okay, and if, of course, I also do readings, transit readings, natal readings, all of those things. And if you're enjoying the detailed forecasts here, I put just as much work into a reading, if not more. So
It's true. I see the notes.
Yeah, the notes are
of his notes.
They're next level. But I do that because I just feel such a great sense of responsibility to do good work and to help people. So you can find that at spencermichaud.com under the Book Now button if you're interested in scheduling a reading with me as well. Okay, we've got the business out of the way. One last thing I will say business-wise for all of you out there today, if you could do me a huge favor, make sure you hit the like button on this video. If you are new, please subscribe so we can connect in that fashion. And if you want to make a material donation to the work that we're doing today, there are two ways that you can support the show. The first is there is a little $sign in the chat box called a super chat or a super sticker, and that is a donation that helps me to do the research that I do and buys me the gift of time. You can also buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com. And of course, booking a reading is another way to show your support. But other than that, I'm just happy that you're here today, and thank you for all your participations. We've got a few more people joining us. Azure is here from France. Hello, my friend. Aligning Light is here from Illinois now, I think. Claire, our friend Claire, is here. Amara Wiley is stopping in from New Jersey. Hello, Amara. Nice to see you. And Carol is joining us from New York City. So I'm glad to see we've got some familiar faces in the audience today. It's so good to be able to interact with all of you. All right, Jared, let's dive into it.
Let's do it.
Any big picture thoughts? Should we bring the chart up right away here? Just kind of take a look at it? Okay. So we're looking at the chart of the full moon in Virgo 3 on March the 18th, 2022, 3:17 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I heard that they're thinking about permanently switching to daylight time. What do you think about that? I'm excited.
I would approve of that. That would do wonders for my life and my mental health.
Yeah.
I would be more of a morning person all of a sudden.
Right.
I mean, if I didn't have to do the jostling back and forth, that would be
Right.
helpful. Right now, I'm not a morning person.
Yeah. I just don't care which one they pick. Just pick one and let's stick with it.
Well, I've always felt like it's so irritating that they do the opposite of what I want.
Right.
Standard time. It would be fine if it was standard time during the summer, but standard time during the winter.
Yeah, that's true.
Worst.
That's true. That's true. All right. So what are you thinking when you're taking a look at this chart on Friday here?
Yeah. So I think one of my first thoughts is I'm like, wow, look at that moon all by her lonesome,
right,
in Virgo, and just everything in Pisces. It's pretty wild, especially with the dispositor of the moon being Mercury in Pisces, but then Mercury being present in, co-present, but in an applying conjunction to its ruler Jupiter in Pisces. Jupiter's in a place of strength.
That's positive.
That's positive. So the biggest thing that it makes me think, the biggest sort of story that I see when I look at this full moon is, or the word that comes to me is surrender. The moon is sort of shining, quote unquote, shining a light or pulling our attention into Virgo themes, but there's very little in the chart other than that moon that provides Virgo capacity and capability. That's the main thing. Yeah. It's just like, well, there's nothing Virgo here except the moon. Everything else is most relevant things are over in Pisces. And so that's why, for me, the word surrender comes to mind because, first of all, because it feels like a Pisces word, um, and because the demands of a Virgo state of mind will be present, um, but the mercurial exactitude and um, and capability of that variety will not be fully present. And
Yeah.
yet, with Mercury being so close to Jupiter, there is clearly a strength there. It's just a very different kind of strength, and it's a pretty complicated arrangement.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you're spot on with the surrender motif. That was something that came back again and again in my recent deep dive into Pisces. I just got done doing a webinar on Pisces, and there's a lot of themes of, being able to co-create with the divine in a space before revelation. And I guess I would say that it in relationship to the spring equinox, when you could see like the little shoot of the plant above the ground, like the reveal type of thing.
Hmm.
And this kind of space of there being some flexibility and some malleability, um, by utilizing our dream state, our dream space, um, coming to a point of acceptance. I think that's another word we can talk about with this, is
Hmm.
figuring out what is possible and what isn't, in regards to acceptance. And yeah, it's a great point about Mercury applying to Jupiter, because in at first blush, you would say, well, the host of the moon, the dispositor, is in really poor condition, in its fall and its exile. But it's making that applying, conjunction there to a really dignified Jupiter. So to me, it's kind of allowing ourselves to have more of a Jupiterian consciousness than necessarily a Mercurial one,
Yeah.
right? Because Mercury is not going to be functioning exactly the way that it would prefer. It's kind of playing by Jupiter's rules, and Jupiter's rules tend to be, unifying, trying to bring order and peace rather than separating things into categories, not questioning as much, and just kind of like you were saying, like surrender and submission to a higher purpose, or to a higher power on some level.
Hmm.
I do think it's important at this full moon, if I were just to add a few big picture thoughts, I think we have to try to get in touch with the reality of our dream as much as is possible. Um, and I think that even though we're talking about surrendering and submitting, you might be able to save yourself a lot of headaches if you are careful and meticulous about the details of the dream that you're trying to manifest, right? Um, so Jared, we've got two cards that are really sticking out with the tarot. The Sun being in Pisces 3 has the 10 of Cups, which is a really, like, it's a hopeful card. It literally has a daimon associated with it, called Elpis, which is related to hope, and we'll get to that in a minute. But um, it's really about this kind of temporary enchantment, this ethereal dream. But it's also a Mars Decan, so it's all about kind of like doing whatever it takes to achieve the perfect, ideal, happy vision, right? What do you think about that Decan and the Sun being there, and how can we navigate that territory gracefully?
Yeah. One thing I will say is that learning about decans has definitely really deepened my understanding of tarot, particularly because if you trace the history of the images, as Austin Kovic has done, you see that sometimes the tarot card and the old Decanic images are kind of diametrically opposed,
Right.
totally different. There will be something extremely macabre and dark in
Yeah,
some
do
old
you know the
text.
Pikatrix one for this one?
Uh, does it involve blood? I don't know.
It involves like, I don't know, just I laugh at it because it's kind of like the dirtiest Decan description.
Oh, right.
It's like the donkey show or something like that. Like I was getting a chuckle out of it when I was doing my webinar because it was talking about a woman being mounted by a donkey or something like that. Like it was really like Randy.
Well, the Picatrix is not a low-key book.
No,
I'll just say
no,
that.
yeah,
So yeah, and I mean, I think this deck and this card illustrates that more than most for me, and it left a big impression on me when I first learned about it. Um, because there's this idea with Pisces 3 of going for the dream
yeah,
and giving it all you've got. And to me, it feels like the story there is about like a huge risk and a huge gamble.
yeah,
And there could be total fulfillment or total despair
yeah,
waiting for you at the end, and you can't really know. And I think that's the Mars quality of that you pointed out of fighting for something
right,
essentially. Um, so that's when I look at the card, that's what I see. I see like, yeah, that's possible. That
yeah,
this glorious vision, rainbow in the sky,
mm-hmm.
is possible, but also what do you sacrifice in hoping to attain that, and what does that do to you? um
100%.
so and I know some people with with placements here, and I've seen that play out in real life in a very dramatic fashion, I
Yeah,
have to say.
yeah.
um
We have some Piscean kin, at least I do. So
mhm,
I've seen that play out in my own experience. Although my dad is a Pisces Decan 1, so
mm,
he's wandering off into the labyrinth of his mind a lot of the times. But my mom has a Pisces moon in the third decan of Pisces, and I've seen her, go to great lengths to achieve her ideals at various points in her life. So, yeah, it is definitely it's a dual-edged sword on some level because, like you were saying, it's not just the happy ending. There are tragic conclusions as well. Not every dream manifests the way that we hope it will. And I think that we're trying to reconcile those two right now. But, I like what you're saying about, sacrifice for the dream. Austin talks a lot about no half measures in this decan.
mhm.
And I'm kind of thinking of like a religious crusade or a crusader's energy where it's like we believe in this so strongly we're willing to die for our dream and for our vision, right?
Yeah,
Just heavy, and that's heavy energy.
very heavy. And I have this, and it's something that we're currently seeing
Right.
um, in a really profound way, also.
Yeah, yeah. In our current events, we definitely have um, stories of heroism, but also stories of zealotry. Where I think that what it boils down to, and I've been saying this in regards to these placements, everybody thinks that they're the hero of their own story on some level, even when they're very wrong when it comes to what is good for the collective. And that's something that is, I think, difficult to parse out with humanity because sometimes we get really attached to a specific viewpoint, and when we can't come to an agreement on it, that's when we see some of the most horrific things that can play out. Because I think this deck it can be the beautiful dream, but I think also there's like visions of genocide that can come from this deck, and also just when people are trying to create this homogenization of culture as well.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
heavy.
Heavy, the heavy energy. The other thing that comes to mind is that with Pisces 3, I think this is my only big and potentially original observation is there's that sacrifice and martyrdom narrative that's kind of built into this decan in this story, and then there's that vision or dream of the, like I said, the rainbow in the sky, the glorious culmination. And I think part of what's so tricky about that is that that may occur, that culmination that you desire, but inevitably it is kind of a transient state. It is a temporary state. There's no such thing as a permanent rainbow in the sky. And this, I think, is what ties together Pisces 3 and Virgo 3.
Right.
So I think that part of what's so tricky about it is that with the Pisces 3 energy, even if you do attain that vision that you're longing for, you're going to attain it for those moments, and you're going to have moments of feeling, very, Pisces things, universal love, and the brotherhood or sisterhood of man, and completion and total connection. But that, you may have still sacrificed something in your pursuit of that vision and that dream. And so there's kind of like, you still have to like wake up tomorrow, get back to life.
Totally.
And you might be like, oh shit, now I have essentially this huge hangover, which is not to say it's inherently like a drugged out pursuit, because it might not be the way that it plays out in your life, but you still just have to move on. And so I think that's the other part that's really tricky about this is like, you put all your chips on this one bet, and then you just have to like go about your life.
Well, and you bring up a good point about transitory nature of reality. I mean, I think there's nothing more transitory than a rainbow, right? I mean, you're observing this beautiful phenomenon of nature, and then literally 15 minutes later, it's gone. So I think that's an important observation that you're making, and you're really anticipating some of the other divination that we're pulling today about the I-Ching, and we'll get into that towards the end of the show. But the I-Ching was talking a lot about waking up from a dream and saying, all right, now we're getting clarity about what the reality is to make this dream real, right? And sometimes there's an opposition between what it takes to make it real and what we thought we were getting into, right? And we can see that. I always like kind of unpacking the sun and full moons as well, because what we're seeing is the sun is bringing us to a focal point as what we are consciously trying to achieve, and the moon provides the body for it, right? It's the body that becomes full with that solar light and that solar intention. So I think when we're seeing this moon in Virgo 3, that decan tends to be more about the end of a material process rather than the end of the rainbow or an emotional dream state, and all of the things that go together with the impermanence of material reality, like order versus entropy, preservation versus decay. And this is a place where I think we're trying to pass on a legacy to the next generation. Like when material form fails, what remains? What essence is going to remain? So I think we could also see the failure of material forms on some level with this full moon, but which will force us to connect with what is eternal in our dream, what is eternal in the feeling that we're trying to attain through that dream, rather than getting attached to what form it's going to take. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that's the surrender part, is surrendering to releasing our expectations about what the form has to be and staying in alignment with the spiritual essence of it.
Maybe we can say more about Virgo 3 to sort of ground that observation.
Let's break that down. And I've got a question in here about how the full moon is going to relate to the trine with Pluto. So we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a second. I have an outline here. We're kind of jumping around in Virgo in Pisces style. Okay. So Virgo 3, we've got the 10 of Pentacles card, where instead of a rainbow and a happy family with the prospect of youth with little children, we've got this old gentleman surrounded by his loyal pets T. Susan Chang talks about this figure possibly related to Odysseus, which
Huh.
is really interesting about how it relates to Pisces. Because I used Odysseus as a mythological archetype for Pisces and his wanderings. So
Mm.
maybe Virgo 3 is about actually the coming home process on some level when he arrives home.
Hmm.
But this decan's daimon is Hestia, and Hestia is the virgin goddess of the hearth or the home. Um, do you have any thoughts about Hestia?
I think I do, but I have to admit, actually, to be perfectly honest, I find Hestia's connection to this Decan somewhat confusing and a little bit mystifying. So I'm actually and I'm sure that it will come alive for me as we're talking a little more, but I'm mostly curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, Hestia is an interesting character in myth. Um, you could call her the keeper of the sacred flame, which, she was responsible for keeping this flame that was in the center of the city alive. Like we had, in Rome, it was most particular to Rome where you had the Vestal Virgins that were protecting the city's flame. So
Right.
there's two ways to think about it. There's the city flame that is the protective spiritual essence of the entire community. But then there's also the flame that people had in their own homes and then their own altar spaces that they would pray to Hestia first to be a protector of the home. Hestia also was about building homes and like homemaking and things of that nature. So I think that when I look at Hestia, to me, what I draw out of that is that, with third decan of Virgo, it's really about they call it wealth in Book T and Book of Thoth. So it's about what are we passing on as a legacy to the next generation when the process that we've come to is ending. So think about Virgo as the ending of the harvest season, and now we've done all the hard work to harvest what needs to stay and return what is needs to be returned to the earth, back to the earth,
Right.
and kind of like, getting in touch with that abundance. But I think that also it's really about the flame represents the spiritual essence that continues to burn
Yeah.
even when we're passing on, from old forms into new forms.
Yeah, it was like once I stopped talking and you started talking, you said like two sentences, and I was like, "Oh, right, no, it's that. It's the thing you were just talking about. That sense of legacy or inheritance when the material form is no longer there. What remains, and like what remains is the sacred flame
Yeah.
within that. So it does really make sense in that way.
Well, I do a prayer to Hestia every morning now. My sort of spiritual practice in the morning involves doing an altar practice for each deity of the day, but I've started including Hestia in kind of this, maybe Hellenistic spiritual practice, and giving them, um, I don't know, honor first. And when I ask Hestia for for help, I always ask to be able to pass on sacred wisdom, to be able to keep sacred wisdom alive. Like when I do these live streams, Hestia is someone or some deity that I would invoke to be able to make sure that what I'm passing on has value, and being able to also protect the home and keep it a sacred sanctuary or a sacred place. Um, and that's really important to me as I don't know, as a Cancerian. Like my home is my sanctuary type of thing.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that that's something what we're looking at here too. The other thing I would say with Virgo 3, Jared, is that you know I have two malefics in this decan. I have Saturn and Mars in this decan, and the lessons that it's brought me have been about coming to terms with the impermanence of the body itself. Like I've had some experiences with my family where they had some really challenging health challenges, where I had to not get fixated on their form and try to connect with their essence even when their form was failing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's been a real huge lived experience for me. And I think that the other thing that I would say about Saturn and Mars there, um, I tend to believe that Saturn provides the blueprint in our life that we are utilizing Jupiter as the demiurge to create from. So one of the techniques like I do in my readings is I will look at your Saturn and then I will say, what is Jupiter? How is Jupiter trying to bring that blueprint into existence? So for me with Saturn and Virgo 3, I would say, I'm trying to pass on sacred wisdom to the next generation. But with my Jupiter in the first decan of Virgo, I need to do it in a way where I'm a continuous student, where I'm continually learning and taking in information and sharing information like the Eight of Pentacles would suggest. Does that make sense?
I can't remember the Eight of Pentacles right now, but
Yeah, Eight of Pentacles is that little, that figure that's like, a craftsman sitting at his bench, making all these different pentacles. And they would call him the apprentice of an advanced age.
that one, yeah.
Just working really
I couldn't
hard.
remember how many pentacles there were on this card.
Yeah, right? And I always think of myself as an eternal student. So I see myself as that.
I mean, that card, that Eight of Pentacles, okay, so that's the Virgo 1 card?
Yeah, Virgo 1.
Yeah, it's very Virgo. Which is my ascendant, Virgo 1.
Yeah.
Definitely eternal student.
Yeah.
I relate to that. Yeah, for me with, so this full moon is going to be right on my Venus, which is, 1 degree away from Venus's maximum fall.
Yeah.
Which is somewhat ironic because in one of the two systems of decanic rulership, Venus rules this decan.
Mm-hmm.
But I have Venus there, and then I have Mars a little earlier in the decan.
Yeah.
So I also have a lot of lived experience with the lessons of Virgo 3, the stories of Virgo 3, and for me, I think Venus draws more attention for me when I'm thinking about the decan. Mm-hmm. It's very easy to see perfectionism here with Venus and Virgo, obviously, but what the decan brings in is this sense of what do you make, what do you do, what do you find beautiful, how do you kind of approach Venusian things if you're always carrying this awareness of the inevitable decay of everything you hold.
It's heavy. It's heavy energy.
It's very heavy. I've lived that heaviness.
Yeah.
And I feel like I have really just kind of gotten accustomed to it. And it's like by carrying around that awareness, you are confronted with a sort of thematic mortality at all times, which is not helpful if your goal is to, have, I don't know. It's not helpful if your goal is to be carefree, I suppose. Right.
Yeah. I would say
to get lost in the moment, unless you're getting lost in the moment in a more transcendent way where you're like with this really significant acceptance of the fact that it's temporary and transitory.
Well, isn't it fascinating that we have both of those themes in the opposing decans? Of transitoriness. And one is of the transitory nature of the body, and the other may be the transitory nature of even like an ideal. Like maybe our ideals are changing as well.
I think this is actually going to be true, I think, for the third decan of Sagittarius and the third decan of Gemini, that those third decans of the mutable signs are really about endings.
Yeah.
Because the mutable signs are themselves transitory. They're about going from one state to another, how you kind of traverse that journey. So the third decan the imagery of the third decans of these mutable signs is often very dark, and I think it's because it's about endings.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
it's
doesn't
about
doesn't
end
Austin call
game.
this one the sarcophagus for Virgo
Yeah.
3?
For here I think we got a sarcophagus for Virgo 3,
Yeah.
and what is it? Like a cup of blood or something
A cup of blood for or for
for
Pisces 3.
Pisces 3.
Yeah. Yep. And we have the executioner's sword for Gemini 3. And then what did he call? A horse's skull.
A horse's skull.
Sagittarius 3.
Very chill. Now, I think we should remember that we are working with the names assigned by Austin, who is himself a very macabre individual. Sure. Yeah. So we don't need to ascribe him godlike naming power, but we can enjoy the thematic resonance.
Yeah.
Even if universally his take on this stuff leans a little goth.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and we will try to bring things full circle for all of you here today too. One of the things that I really aspire to on this channel is not to scare people, but to be realistic about the things that we're experiencing, but then also hopefully bring us to a place of centeredness where we can at least have some kind of ways that we can try to deal with whatever we're experiencing, whether it's through acceptance or through initiating change. And I think that different things are going to require different circumstances. I do feel with this full moon that there is a more of a allow the process to happen type of energy with this, rather than having to force your will on something. I don't think forcing your will is going to work this time around. The animal that we pulled reflects that as well. We'll get to that, but we got the jellyfish for the animal of the moon here, which really talks about going with the flow and surrendering to the currents of your life. Mm-hmm. Let's see.
One thing I will just add in defense of Austin's goth aesthetics, sure. If you look at the source material,
it's pretty dark.
It's pretty goth.
Yeah, so, the Latin Picatrix is not bedtime stories unless you want
even nightmares. Like the Ibn Ezra stuff.
Yeah,
leans pretty crazy.
That's true. That's true. Jared, I'm going to check in on the chat box here and see what we've got with people coming in. We've got a few more people joining us. We've got Craig joining us from Iowa. Hello, my friend. Raven is here from Kansas. Welcome, Raven. We've got Spirit Throw Me a Bone live, ! Joining us from Northern Virginia, I think. Yeah. Lisa Newcomb is joining us from upstate New York. And we've got Cookerzilla asking us about the Virgo full moon trining Pluto. So I haven't forgotten about that question. We'll get to that in a second. Lisa's talking about actively choosing faith and taking on action in your ideals. I like that. We've got Henry Harrison joining us from Kentucky. And another person commenting they have Mars at 28 Pisces. Oh, this is going to be right on your Mars. I have Mars at 28 Virgo, so the moon's going to be right on my Mars. So Jared and I are going to be experiencing this firsthand. And then Spirit Throw Me a Bone is going to get their chart lit up here. Carol says they have 3 planets in Virgo 3, so you'll feel this one, Carol. Yevgen is here. Welcome, Yevgen. My thoughts and my prayers are with you, my friend, with some of the things that are going on in Europe right now. And really, I've been thinking about you a lot lately, my friend Yevgen. Tanya is here from inside the house. Memento Mori, which can be quite motivating, which I think is related to our...
Remind me what that means. Right now I can't remember. Or maybe
I'm guessing it's a death memory. If I'm trying to help us out, Tanya. Like I don't know my Latin that well, but it feels like Mori being related to mortality.
Yeah. Also, we got a skull emoji.
Yeah, there's a skull emoji, exactly. Like the knowledge of our own death is what I would say that probably is.
Reminder of death.
Reminder of death. There we go. Okay. Yevgen says, my part of spirit is in my 12th house, Virgo 27th degree, all of my Ukrainian family stuck in Ukraine under Russian fire. The illumination in the house of enemies. Goodbye to my dream to bring my family to the United States. Man, that's heavy, Yevgen. Like I said, our thoughts, our prayers, our well wishing, trying to put intentions towards peace. It is a reality check when we have folks from around the world joining us and having a direct experience of some of these things that are going on. And I just hope for your sake and your family's sake that something peaceful gets resolved over there. And like I said, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. And sometimes, thinking about these things, there's a little bit of helplessness, I think, that comes into play that I start to feel. So I don't know if I have the right comforting words for you, but we're definitely with you in spirit as much as we can be. Raven says, I have Saturn in the third decan of Pisces, Mars in the third decan of Virgo, and Mercury in third decan of Gemini. Oh no, Raven. Oh my goodness. It says, I'm laughing so hard at the names. Well, Raven, I'm sure that your chart's getting blasted with this full moon. And I hope that you're able to navigate these waters gracefully as well. Remco is joining us from the Netherlands. Welcome, Remco. It's good to see you as well. Listening in while cooking. I hope that your cooking is going well, Remco. We've got people are commenting on their placements in Gemini 3 and the third decans of mutable signs. Those are tough placements. I'm sure that every one of us that has some planets in those placements really has to come to terms with endings and changes on some level. And that's one of the hardest things that you can have to deal with as a human being, is really facing change, I think, sometimes. Okay. Yeah, Lisa's sending prayers and for safety and peace to Yevgen as well and your family. I think that's a sentiment that's echoed by everybody here. Okay, Jared, should we move forward? We got to get back to Cookerzilla's question here. So Cookerzilla was asking us about the trine to Pluto at 27 degrees of Capricorn. What are you thinking about the contact with the moon and Pluto here?
I guess, having struggled to come up with a thought until this very moment, the thing that is coming to my mind is sometimes with astrology, when you have multiple factors in a chart which are suggesting similar themes, it's a helpful way to sort of filter the various possibilities. And so what's coming up for me is that Pluto, while not always being about, and usually not being about literal death in a chart, because that would be more of a Saturn thing, etc. Pluto, I think, has a natural resonance, if not a technical resonance, with some of the things we've been talking about Virgo III and, this decan, which Austin has given the lovely name, the sarcophagus.
Right.
And as much as I always try to find a better way, or a different word, that we're talking about transient states, we're talking about death and mortality on a symbolic level, the passing away of material form, and its change or transformation into other states. And so to know that there is this very powerful assist from Pluto, which is a celestial body which is tied into those very themes. I think, the two pieces to look at are, how does this change the manifestation of the full moon and collectively and individually? And then also, what does it mean for it to be a trine? What does it mean to receive support from, Hades?
I mean, I think that's important because it is a positive, flowing aspect.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add this into it. So if, we're not giving Austin the final say on the name, but this book here, T. Susan Chang, 36 Secrets, which is another great Decanic exploration, calls Virgo III Return on Enfleshment. So more about like, what do you get as the result of your material process, right?
I like that actually because it even more like fully ties together these two decans that we're
Yeah,
comparing and contrasting.
yeah,
Return, because obviously that's a pun. Return
right.
on investment, return on enfleshment. So
Inflation, yeah,
where Pisces 3 has that theme of like of great, basically of great sacrifice and then spiritual and emotional fulfillment.
hmm,
Here in Virgo, we have I guess a similar theme where the inevitable material sacrifice and sort of the need to discover spiritual legacy within
yeah,
that.
yeah. And I think that contact with Pluto, Pluto's in the third decan of Capricorn, and that's the Four of Pentacles decan, where we're talking about the throne of matter. And really, the gist of that decan to me is administration of material power and authority.
Mhm.
So I think that there's for us to be able to get the return on enfleshment, there is probably going to be contact with a powerful bureaucratic structure potentially. And we may have to change our relationship to power, to authority, to maybe even reveal corruption within that to be able to transform it and transmute it. I mean, I think Pluto to me, I'm a broken record when I say this, but Pluto is like a plumber to me. It's bringing up all the shit that has been pushed down and repressed. It's also related to great wealth. This is why we have that word plutocracy,
Yeah.
which in our current, global political climate, a lot of the conflicts we're seeing are because of plutocrats taking over, and the very very wealthy exerting their power upon the not so wealthy. So I think that there is a need to negotiate with power on this on some level as well, or to root out corruption, to be able to heal those governing structures that bring us boundaries and bring us the ability to manage our lives. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think that this is going to be a lighthearted full moon. I think when you bring Pluto into any lunation, there's an intensity, an intensification that's added to things. There's a danger of utilizing power in ways that could be manipulative as well. That's one of the dark sides of Pluto. There are themes with Pluto of abduction in the mythological stories. So I always like to deal with Pluto in a way that says, let me get clear on what it is that has been ignored for a long period of time, and how can we utilize our sense of change. Jared, I wanted to toss this out to you because I feel like you'd have some interesting thoughts on this. One of my favorite ways of looking at the outer planets is through Robert Schmidt from Project Hindsight. And he talks about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto as transcendental sun for Uranus, transcendental moon for Neptune, and then transcendental Mercury for Pluto, which is creating the mixture and the achemical change between the one mind and the one thing. Does that make sense? What do you think about that? Does that resonate with you?
The one thing.
Yeah. Are you familiar with that Hermetic concept?
I'm not.
So in Hermeticism, they think about the collective, maybe even the collective consciousness. I wouldn't even call it the collective unconscious, the collective consciousness as the one mind. And
Mhm.
the one mind acts upon the one thing, which is related to universal substance, which we could call Neptune, right? And then
Whoa.
the blending of those two things, it potentially could be reflected in Pluto. Being able to figure out the process of change. Ann Ortley, who's another Virgo astrologer, talks about Pluto as the process of dissolving the the caterpillar into a butterfly, right? But it's the process, it's the painful, like, melting of every atom in your body, like, so that you could reform into something else.
So
Yeah.
I feel like with this idea of the one mind and the one thing, it's reminding me of the basic dichotomy of spirit and fortune.
Hmm.
Is that a conscious link, or is that sort of just something that emerges from
No, I
antiquity?
think that's a really great connection. Yeah, follow that thread.
Well, just because sun, is belongs to spirit, moon belongs to fortune, and you're comparing, or I mean, I guess Schmidt is comparing Uranus to the sun and Neptune to the moon in this way, although obviously tapping into much grander versions of these energies, or whatever we'll call them.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess this really is like a real time, just like one of our conversations, except there's a bunch of people listening to us. It's like, explain
Yeah.
that. Tell me more. Because
That's fine.
I'm like learning in real time. I'm like trying to. It's making me think even about Mercury. I'm like, okay, so do we see
Yeah.
Mercury as the mediator between sun and moon?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Or
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, we do. I do,
yeah,
because it goes between worlds. It's
yeah.
the
I guess
deliverer.
I see Mercury as mediator between everything. So
Yeah. Exactly.
um, yeah, so that on this much more transcendent level, Pluto serving that function. That's definitely interesting. I've never come across that before.
Yeah, Schmidt is, I think, one of the geniuses of one of the modern geniuses that of traditional astrology, I guess. But he was a really original thinker. I really enjoy listening to him. You can find his lectures online now. I believe you can pay like a nominal monthly fee and have access to all of them. Um, but I really highly recommend his stuff. He's really opened my mind to a lot of different things as well. And I learned a lot about Schmidt through my studies with Achyuta Bhavadas at Nightlight Astrology, and also, Chris Brennan turned me on to a lot of his work as well. So, all right, should we move forward? I hope Cookerzilla that brought Pluto into the equation in a satisfactory fashion. Let's move forward to one of the some of the other astrology that's happening concurrently between this full moon, and then in between the full moon and the last quarter moon that we'll experience on the 1st of April. The first thing I wanted to kind of bring people's awareness to, and actually something that I missed in my monthly forecast, because it's not always something I'm looking for, is this Venus here being in its malefic enclosure. For those of you who aren't familiar, malefic enclosure is a condition in Hellenistic or traditional astrology where a planet is enclosed by both Mars and Saturn, and there's no other planet making an intervening aspect. So you can see there is no any of the traditional 7 planets making an aspect to Venus. We've got Mercury, Jupiter, and the Sun all in aversion. We've got the Moon in aversion here because it is in the opposition on the other side of the opposition here, one house next to it. Yes, we have a square from Uranus. We'll get to that in a second, but for this concept, it doesn't necessarily count as far as breaking up the malefic enclosure. One thing I'll say about this, and then we'll kind of open it up again in a second, is this is going to be activated in your Aquarius house because Venus is at 11 or 12 degrees of Aquarius, but it will be affecting your Libra and Taurus houses as well, because Venus is having difficulty providing resources for those 2 topics in your chart. How have you been experiencing this malefic enclosure, Jared, and what kind of things do you have as far as reflections on that condition?
Right when you asked, before you asked that, I was like, oh yeah, how is this affecting me? And I actually have no idea. I've not been able to trace any Just to be honest, I have not been able to trace any direct effects in my life, as far as I can tell. Um, but it's moving through my sixth house.
Yeah.
I'm there's definitely a lot of like drudgery, a lot of definitely some stuff going on with regard to like health and medicine that I'm exploring, but
Yeah.
it's nothing dire. It's more of a problem solving situation. But I definitely think that there's a lot of collective and general, manifestations of Venus that are going to be affected by this, that are affected by this, or at least that are described by this.
Right.
I tread lightly here, and I almost don't even want to bring this up, but using the word besiegement,
Hmm.
this is not true probably every time a planet is besieged like this, but I feel like we've been seeing, tracing this kind of ongoing Mars Venus conjunction that was previously in Capricorn and now in Aquarius, has it has lined up with events in the world, events in Europe, and some of what's gone on there. And I guess I just can't help but notice that, like, we have this very medieval, what feels like a medieval term,
Yeah.
besiegement. And
A literal representation of it basically
we
playing
have a
out.
literal representation of
Right.
it, this whole like strategy of the siege playing out in real time.
Well, and also, Venus as peacemaker being in a very tight spot where
Yeah,
it's
there's
almost
really
like, yeah, go ahead.
you can't lead with Venus right now.
Yeah.
It's just not an option,
Yeah.
because not when Venus is caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
There's
What?
just you can't. That's not the. Um, you can hope for the best
Well,
for peace and
I think what
diplomacy, but
world leaders are trying to parse out is how do we resolve this situation without escalating it into something catastrophic, right?
yeah,
And that feels like Venus in a malefic enclosure right now, like this difficulty acting on a big level towards Venus's ends.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah, it's interesting to be able to live through these periods of time. I mean, interesting, but I mean, it's kind of like it's pretty nerve wracking and horrifying. Um, but I am glad
very
that,
horrifying to witness,
yeah,
and there's a lot of helplessness. I mean, there are things that can be done, and there are things that are being done that can happen.
yeah,
Um, but in the meantime, I do think that diplomacy is is really trapped and caught in the crossfire, because you know you have to. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I will say this, Jared. One of the gifts of studying astrology is seeing when this condition actually would
Change.
arise, but also when it changes and when it would end. So, the good news with this is that on the 28th of March, Venus will exit its malefic enclosure as it makes a conjunction with Saturn. So, to me, that could be one moment where we start to see some movement in the situations that we're working through. I'll also point out, and this is getting a little bit farther ahead, but Jupiter and Neptune are going to be conjoining in the third decan of Pisces around April the 11th or 12th. And in some of the studies I've been doing recently, especially through this book, Planetary Cycles in Mundane Astrology, by Andre Barbeau, a French astrologer, he talks about peace treaties being a pretty a pattern with Jupiter Neptune, and especially when Jupiter is well dignified. Like we had the Treaty of Versailles, which ended another European conflict. We had the formation of the League of Nations with a Jupiter Neptune conjunction. Many instances with changes in regards to various factions coming together for peace. So that gives me some hope as an astrologer. So I will throw that out there. It's not a guarantee that that's the way it's going to play out, but that could be a possibility based on, what we're seeing in the chart here.
It's also worth noting and kind of, well, whatever. It's worth noting that after Venus exits this really kind of difficult situation, Venus then moves into Pisces,
Right.
where it's co-present with Jupiter. It's in its exaltation. There's a huge shift coming for the planet Venus, and probably a huge relief. I don't mean for every person on Earth, but I mean the general weather is going to shift pretty dramatically. And then, I guess there's things we want to say about all this. You're obviously going to do another forecast for the time period that we're kind of getting into, but it is, I think, what's coming up for me is that there's that moment of the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction with these historical, what's the word I'm looking for? Whatever. Historical evidence that it has to do with peace and peace treaties.
Right.
Simultaneously with the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction is the Mars-Saturn conjunction. With Saturn in a very powerful place, Mars in a less powerful place.
Right.
And so I can't help but think it sort of feels like, without making a, hard prediction, because I obviously don't really know, but it does feel like there's a lot of potential for a breakthrough
There's our
of peace.
Mars-Saturn conjunction right around April the 4th.
Yeah, around the same time.
Yeah.
And it feels like both a breakthrough for peace, but also new hard lines being drawn that are sort of like the seed of future conflict. Because basically the cycle between Mars and Saturn, we can look at that moment as being like the new moon of that relationship, which is the relationship between the two malefics. And
it's tough. Yeah.
So I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if we're going to see some of these kind of border issues that we've been living with border issues since the last Mars Saturn conjunction.
Right.
All globally, borders shut down all over the world, and then we've been sort of gradually figuring that out and loosening them. But now we're seeing sort of the beginnings of what feels like a new phase of where, like, the openness that we've taken for granted for a long time between most nations in the world, that you could freely travel and all this stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if we have a breakthrough, whether temporary or more significant than that, a breakthrough for peace or a ceasefire or something, but simultaneously a new reality of our shared, collective circumstances and our global our experience of separations and borders. And
well, we seem to have two camps that have been developing over the course of this. One being based on authoritarianism, and the other maybe on a slightly more liberal, universal type of experience. And I think that, I agree with what you're saying. And I think that one of the things that Andre Barbeau was pointing out is that sometimes we're galvanizing a group that comes together, but it's also othering some other type of philosophy as well, right? So maybe if there's something
hard in response.
Yeah, so maybe if something comes together with peace, that's also, galvanizing the authoritarian part of the world as well, that maybe, creating this, maybe a sense of separation also, which is frustrating. I think that, it's complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of what I'm getting at, to be more blunt about it, is like, if we look at the incredibly severe actions that have been taken to isolate Russia, I find it hard to believe that a ceasefire is going to also roll back all of those actions. And also a lot of the economic sanctions have yet to really play out, right? And so there's been such a huge like crackdown in Russia on media and dissidents and protesters and all this stuff.
Yeah.
That feels like a potentially and not to freak people out if anybody's, listening in Russia, but it feels like common sense to say that I don't think Putin's going to be like, okay, great. If this situation ends, he's going to be like happy to restore the liberties of people
Yeah.
living there. And so
It's a bad
it's almost like
situation for the citizens of Russia as well as, the citizens of Ukraine. It's not apples to apples 100%, but, there are, when you have people who are abusing power, a lot of the times it's just the regular people that are having to suffer from that, and I think that there's definitely collateral damage for the people of Russia as well. And I have compassion. I do have compassion for those folks that are just trying to live their regular lives and have to
they don't
live.
have a voice.
Right. They don't have a voice. They're
Government.
being oppressed. There's an authoritarian regime that started to take over and dictate what will or won't happen, what is allowed to be said or not said. And that's a big problem. That's a big humanitarian crisis as well. So I agree that there isn't an easy answer to this. And that's why I feel like the malefic enclosure of Venus, I do think really reflects this problem, because we're trying to bring unity, we're trying to harmonize things, we're trying to bring balance, and it's just not it's not easy right now. There's not a clear path towards it at the moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's sad. I don't know. There's not
You
words that
negotiate when somebody is in the middle of attacking you.
yeah,
You have to have a ceasefire first,
right.
and then you can go, because what are you negotiating about? What are you?
Right.
Why would you give anything away if you're being actively attacked? So
100%.
but I guess it feels like there's some hardening of these new divisions,
Yeah.
even as we may have new opportunities to resolve certain problems.
I think that's something to be hyper aware of as we move forward, is how are we dealing with the preventing this type of thing from happening in the future, right? Like what steps are we taking to facilitate actual peace moving forward versus like this thing rising up and happening again. The other thing I will point out at this moment that we're talking about is that both Mars and Saturn are at the bending of the nodes of the moon, which are pivotal turning points. So we've had all of the planets, recently that have been going through Aquarius, going through this time period of the bending of the nodes. Venus will hit the bending of the nodes, the north bending, on the 30th of March. And then, we have Mars moving through that place as well. To me, this is a point where it's like, okay, we're moving towards a different reality. We're leaving the past behind, embracing the future. In our own personal lives as well, we may be having some really important choices that we have to make to move our lives forward. I just don't think that we're going to be able to just stay where we are physically or mentally or emotionally. There's some kind of change or movement that is coming in the next few months ahead that may also coincide with the eclipses that are happening at the end of April as well.
Yeah.
A lot. I mean, I know I'm going through this in my personal life too, with family and certain situations and transitions with a kid going to college and other factors. And I definitely feel the weight of the life-changing weight of what's happening in our own personal life. And it's also reflected in our collective as well. All right, Jared. It's such a heavy time. But,
I take responsibility for the heaviness of my my perspective and my mind. I do have a Mercury Pluto conjunction.
Well, and I'll tell you what, one of the things that I like about talking with you, and I think another thing to point out about Virgo 3 that I think will help us to contextualize this a little bit too, is that Virgo 3 sometimes we can be prone to some pessimism, where Pisces 3 can be prone sometimes to some naive optimism and hope. So it's trying to balance those two kind of themes also. All right, where we're saying, okay, what is the, how do we remain hopeful when, Pandora's box is unleashing all the ills that humanity experiences, old age, death, war, decay, all of those things, like, because in that Pandora story, hope was what remained under the lip of the jar to be able to kind of, bring support to humanity. And you have a beautiful song about that you were sharing with me earlier today that I've heard before, but it was a great reminder. Yeah, can you speak more on the Pandora myth and that part of this story?
So I can't remember the name. Elpis or Elpis. I don't know how you say
Hmm.
it, but I believe the diamond of the third decan of Pisces
Yeah.
is Elpis, which is not a deity per se, but is the personification of hope, right?
Hmm.
In Greek thought. And yeah, so I think there are multiple versions of the Pandora myth, right? I think there
Yeah.
might be a version where Pandora is not involved and like it's Epimetheus.
Right.
Um, but the general idea that of safeguarding, Pandora is given this jar or box to safeguard and told not to open it. So of course she opens it.
Mhm.
As you said, all the chaos of the world escapes. And then, but what remains within the jar is hope. And I will, without getting into my music, I will say that I drew in my, when I was looking at this myth and trying to sit with it, I was, in some ways I was kind of mostly struck by the misogyny of it.
Mm.
And in that way, it reminded me of Eden and Eve.
Right.
It feels very similar because it feels like a mythic way of trying to deal with and integrate the sort of like the fall, the fall from some mythic past of not even perfection, but just ignorance and lack of awareness. I
Mm.
see that's what I see in the Pandora myth. It's like all that chaos was existed, but it was just in the jar, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and so anyway,
Well, one addition to that, Jared, is I think that part of the story is that if we try to unpack it a little bit psychologically, the Pandora was sent by Zeus to punish humanity for stealing fire,
all right,
right? For stealing the knowledge of their own divinity, their own divine origin.
yeah,
Because that was a big no-no. Prometheus facilitated that by tricking Zeus. Giving him the portion of the sacrifice, and then there's a whole story around it. Theoi.com is a great resource for that story. But I think that there's a kernel in there that I'm trying to unearth about understanding, our own divinity, our own divine origins, but having that be painful. I think, and I've said in the past that I'm not another animal, so I don't know about other animals' ability to understand their own mortality. But I do know that we as human beings are aware of our own mortality, and that can be, if we didn't have this elpis, this hope, it would be something that would maybe the end of our species, because we'd be like, well, what's the point? Why are we even doing this? We're just going to die, like. And sometimes those feelings can arise with placements moving through these decans in particular. But I do think that what is remaining can help get us through those moments. There's a story in Prometheus Bound, where part of a variation on that story is that Prometheus gave hope to humanity to be able to get them through, this knowledge of their own demise or their own death or their own doom.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and with this one, whereas I was having a hard time kind of drawing a link between Virgo 3 and Hestia. This one, it's not that hard.
Yeah.
Pisces 3, I think we've talked a lot about hope, as a theme. Sometimes it might be misplaced hope, or it
Yeah.
might be naive, but it is necessary, right?
100%.
It's important.
And I'm reminded of the cyclical nature of being, where we start off in the world as children, maybe having that naive optimism that hasn't been crushed by our knowledge of material rules and reality. And then we grow into these adults that are very aware of our limitations often. And then maybe as we age, we're throwing off some of that material weight and dross, and returning maybe to that childlike state on some level, hopefully with lessons learned or some wisdom or whatnot. But yeah, I think that there's always an opportunity to come to a place of acceptance about what is possible and what isn't as well.
Yeah, and I feel like, especially because this is a full moon, it's inherently an opposition.
Yeah.
And so when you're dealing with oppositions, you have to try to find balance between two opposing sort of archetypes or energies.
Yeah.
It's got to be a better word. But,
That's your Virgo rising talking. Oh, energy scoff.
so
No, I
I
feel
think
you.
that that's if nothing else, I hope
You haven't said the word portal yet, so that's
I would never. I hope that if nothing else, this conversation, if it has provided insight into what even we're dealing with, so that we can find an inner balance between these things.
Yeah.
Between the Pisces 3 and the Virgo 3.
I mean, I think that's the key, right? I think one of the things that when we have oppositions in the chart, it's not always the fact that we have to quote unquote solve it. I think sometimes we just have to hold the duality and the paradox between the two, and just accept that we are going to feel torn in a couple different directions, and that's just life. Sometimes we don't have to necessarily always reconcile it. And that's been something that's been affecting me.
To draw from music, you just got to get those two instruments to sit together in the mix.
That's right.
Maybe you got,
even if they're dissonant, right?
maybe you need to EQ the reverb a little bit, take out some highs.
Yeah.
It's getting in the way of the other thing. So
Totally. And I love that. I love that. So turn the EQ knob of your life to get the right.
only
To get the
only
right.
I can EQ my life, and even the audio spectrum of my ears are. I would love to have a live EQ of my hearing.
Well, that might be the real essence of mastery, right? Or mastering, right? Seeing how we can apply these situations and these celestial compositions in all sorts of different circumstances, which is the goal of mastering an album. Is it going to sound good in the car? Is it going to sound good on your stereo? So how do we bring these to different?
You just went there, and I'm here for it.
Right.
Think of that.
So we need to be our own mastering engineers and see how we can bring that to our own. This is that was totally completely musician service for Jared, but
it was uncalled for. No, it was great actually. That's
yeah. I you don't really understand how valuable a mastering engineer can be until you hear your finished album in before and after. It really is remarkable.
Yeah.
So okay, so we've got a few comments coming in here. Tanya is coming from inside the house. Welcome, Tanya. It's saying the near future looks like the best times and the worst of times. Like some areas are going to be amazing, Venus and Jupiter, right? Because we have a Venus-Jupiter conjunction happening in Pisces, which is amazing. And some others might be like a new chapter of scary problems with Mars and Saturn. Yes, definitely. Both at once. We have to hold that duality, like the mastering EQ. And since the benefics don't witness that Mars and Saturn biz at all, it may feel like help is just out of reach or in a little bubble somewhere. I think that's true, Tanya. I think that sometimes we can have really good things happening in some areas of our life and really horrifying things happening in other areas of our life. I've experienced that with Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn all in the same sign. So when I get a monthly perfection, it's like, oh, this really awesome thing is happening. Oh, this the shittiest thing in the world is happening simultaneously. So I feel you on that. Aligning light astrology, Claire is saying, I have placements in the last decan of all the mutable signs, and I'm feeling a lot of feelings. Skull emoji. Yeah, I imagine that is a difficult place to be lit up. If
All
you
the
have
mutable signs.
right, all the mutable
So
signs.
you're saying you have a grand cross
Grand cross, craziness. So
in
pulled in a lot of different directions, requiring flexibility, I would say. EK White is here. Hello, EK. Says not a musician, but really enjoying this bouncing of wavelengths between artists. Yeah, me too. Me too, EK. You know, it's always fun when I have old friends on the show, and we're able to kind of get into the hive mind a little bit. So we're bringing, that musician mind as well. And I think that's honestly, and Jared, you can probably confirm this, but there's a lot of similarities between music and astrology, and the type of consciousness that you have to tap into to master both of those arts. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I think my Virgo-ness is standing in the way of just being like, yeah, totally. I'm like, what do you mean? No.
Right.
um, I think that it's not a coincidence that there are a lot of astrologers who are also musicians and have like a whole life that's like, oh yeah, I was a musician for 20 years and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I've met quite a lot of people with that background. I think that the commonality of consciousness
Mm-hmm.
is not easy for me to actually identify or articulate though.
I think it's a right brain, left brain balancing kind of thing. I think it's
Yeah.
a,
Well, it's like it's like skill, and it's like that combination of skill and creativity.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
the sort of like there's the spiritual and um, emotional qualities that are intrinsic to something which is ultimately just sort of like a physical phenomenon.
yeah, 100%. And
Um,
I like to compare it to the midwife and the sculptor. We music is a system that has specific rules that are flexible, okay, that have flexibility based on the different I don't know, genres that you're working with. And astrology's the same way. There's different genres of astrology that we're working with natal, horary, traditional, modern, Uranian, whatever it is. And I think that the greatest musicians and the greatest astrologers are not completely fixated on either technique or improvisation. They have a really great balance between the two. For example, when I was a young musician, I had a really great ear, but I rejected wholeheartedly any music theory. I was like, I don't want to learn a system. I don't want to become a musical robot. And I really
that's very Gen X of you.
it was, yeah. It was just I'm not gonna be surrender to the system. I'm a rebel. And I would just hear stuff, and that
I was
helped,
the same.
it helped me develop in a certain way. But then I realized the limitation of that perspective, because I was having difficulty articulating what I heard in my mind and communicating it to other people. That was the main thing, is that
Like
I
me.
couldn't say, hey, let's do a 1-4-5 in the key of C and let's make it a major 7, a minor 7, and a dominant 7. Like that is a very specific sound. And, I would try to, Jared, when I was first making albums, I was like, it sounds like pink clouds. Can you give me the pink cloud sound?
They were like, "You're not Joni Mitchell.
Yeah, right. So
I'm not taking this from you. Tell
specific
me what chord."
somebody. I want it to sound like pink clouds, and I think what I really wanted was a major 7th, and so it's the same with astrology. It's by being able to have a shared language, we're able to communicate some of these things in different ways through different archetypes and stories and different systems. And it is about the balance between technique and then that oracular space that you're creating, like almost like forgetting the technique in the moment, not forgetting it, but
Yeah.
utilizing it as instinct, having
Yeah.
it become instinct through practice, right?
Yeah. Eventually it becomes expert intuition, which where
Yes.
you've done something enough times that it's just there. It
Well,
feels like intuition, but actually it's skill.
skill, yeah. There's a book that I like. I wonder if you've read this book. It's called Effortless Mastery by Kenny Werner, who was a jazz piano player. And he
Mm.
talks about
Oh
that
yeah, I know that.
specific. Yeah, it's an amazing book. I don't have it anymore because I keep giving it to guitar students over the years. I keep buying it and then giving it away because it's really about that balance between practicing your technique as much as you can and then letting it become an instinct.
Which, let me just say, is very much a Mercury Jupiter conversation.
100%.
Right. And
Yeah,
that's which is
balancing those
extremely
things out.
important for this whole dialogue,
Yeah.
Pisces Virgo. Um and in this case, with this full moon, Jupiter is really holding the cards.
Yep. Which is more about the intuitive
Yeah.
understanding and more about the surrender rather than the rational conscious you know technique, the
Which makes
core
me think
process.
that this like part of like this full moon is like about having faith in your skill, having faith that
Yeah.
you the Mercury is it's almost like it's like the Force or the Schwartz,
Right.
depending on whether you're a Star Wars or Spaceballs fan. It's like the Schwartz is within you.
Well, you
Sorry,
know
the
what,
Force.
Jared, you know what it is, it's Luke having the helmet put on him when he's going through that like training sequence with Obi-Wan, where he's like, let go your conscious self and trust the force, and he has to
Yeah,
like fend off the little laser beams. And he finally does it when he just finally lets go and
yeah.
isn't overthinking it.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, I think it's like about you have to trust that you have learned, that you have learned what you need to learn because you're not always going to have a dignified Mercury at your disposal, essentially, is what it comes down to.
Well, and also, Jared, think about this. Virgo is the process of refinement, I think, as well. And
Hmm.
when we're getting to these final decans, it's like you've done everything that you can do. There's no more refining. Here's the result of what you've been doing,
Yeah,
right? The
yeah.
end result. So yeah,
That's the acceptance factor.
oh God, 100%. And I'll tell you, that perfectionism thing you were bringing in earlier, that was really the bane of my existence as an artist, as a young artist. I used to erase holes in the pages of things that I would be drawing because I wanted it to be real. I wanted it to be a reflection of reality, not like an artistic license. I was like, it has to look exactly photorealistic, or I'm going to erase a hole in the paper. you know, that was young Spencer dealing with his Virgo 3 placement, where you can almost destroy something through your perfectionism, right?
Yeah,
Um,
that's a Mars in Virgo 3
yeah,
um, pitfall.
100%. So Michael Polson is here and saying, "I love the production analogies. A mastering engineer from North Carolina over here, raising their hands. That's cool.
That's amazing.
Excellent." Claire is saying that I'm a musician, artist, dancer person as well, and I think a link with Astro is creativity. Yeah, 100%. There's all sorts of different creative, mediums that this same type of idea that we're discussing would apply to 100%. Raven says skill and intuition, the ability to learn something foundationally and then add your own flair. Yeah, well, yeah, I think so. Being able to kind of get into learn your techniques and then let your expression of self come through with that. I know that was when I was a young musician. Mimicry was something that was kind of the first stage, And then when you absorb and mimic others and do it with multiple artists, eventually you keep what resonates with you and discard some of the things that you might not even be able to do physically. And then it comes out as your own voice as a combination of those things. Henry says this is also relatable. Well, thank you, Henry. I'm glad that you are gaining some wisdom from this. Lynn is laughing that we're not Joni Mitchell.
The reason I said that was because when Joni Mitchell is working on music, she's in the studio, she really does talk to, maybe you already know this, but just for anybody who doesn't, she really does talk to the musicians she's working with imagery, like you were saying. Yeah. Like, I want it to sound like Pink Clouds. And it has resulted in some really good albums, and she does have a Pisces moon. So
well, there you go.
we have to give her that.
And that method for me was somewhat effective. It just was frustrating for me sometimes because some things got lost in translation. And I think that if I had had more technical knowledge to be able to describe what I was thinking, it just would have gone quicker. I think sometimes we get to the place that we're going, but it just takes a long time. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. I think it's frustrating for her too. I mean, she never really studied music in a particularly technical way, but she obviously is a musical genius and has an incredible ear for things. And I think that what's in her biography, what was really hard for her was the way that it both impacted, it was an obstacle for her autonomy, but it also, I think, was part of her drive to have autonomy, was because she had that obstacle. It made her want it all the more. Right. So anyway, I'm just talking about Joni Mitchell now, but
and that's one of the things I like about your music too, is that you are very skilled technically. You have a theory base that is very advanced, and you bring jazz elements into what you do, but also you're a great improviser as well, and bringing in a lot of soul into what you do in your work.
Thank you.
And another person that really reflects this, regardless of what I think about his personal choices, is Michael Jackson. Like, he had a Virgo sun and a Pisces moon, so he was born in sort of the opposite full moon, where he was almost forced into like the militant practice and technique, but also was able to tap into some kind of ethereal creativity that made him a very formidable artist, albeit a troubled individual.
Yeah.
So.
Just for the record, I used to be no matter what I've learned, like music theory wise, I didn't go to school for it. And I mostly learned by just throwing myself in situations where I was ill-equipped, and I was always the guy in the band that like didn't know the like whatever, like the sharp 4, like the E flat major 7 sharp 4 add 9 voicing on guitar, and everybody else was like, you don't even know. So it's all relative.
What was that? What was your guitarist name? Greg? Is that his name? Am I remembering this?
You knew that voicing. We'll just say that.
Just some inside musician memories, but a great guitarist, but also probably a technical guy on some level too.
Well, I was just very much left in the dust in those days. Yeah. I had to catch up.
But you guys still created some really amazing music. I was listening to the radio this morning, and I had a really fond memory of a cover that you did with your band a few years ago. I don't know if you want to share the name of your band, but a cover of Purple Rain that you did at a place here in Ann Arbor. I believe it was at the Blind Pig a while ago. And every time I hear Purple Rain and Prince now, I'm just like, oh man, that reminds me of that killer cover that Jared did. So it's really, really fun. All right.
Purple Rain feels very Pisces to me.
Oh yeah, and Prince has a Pisces moon, so that's another artist that was able to tap into just the stream of the collective unconscious on some level, and just the mixture of Mercury and Jupiter that we were talking about, that Michael Jackson and Prince had. Yeah. Those two artists being born roughly about 2 or 3 months apart in 1958, so they share a lot of chart placements as well, but. Prince is the Gemini version, and Michael Jackson was the Virgo version.
Right.
Okay, so let's see if we can move forward here. Hopefully, we haven't completely bored people to death with our music
I find
tangent.
that I feel like the more off topic we got, the more comments we've been getting.
Yeah, I think so. I think that creativity is something I think that's really really relevant for this full
Yeah.
moon. So I think that getting into that space of how do we go through the creative process, and how do we come to a place of acceptance of when the actual piece of art is done, right? And an artist will tell you it's never done. But where do we get to the stopping point, right?
Mm.
Where we say this is good enough to share with the world. And that may be something that we're experiencing here, is knowing when to say when and move on to just the next thing. Not that it's ever completely done, but put it out in the world. Are you working on any music right now where that theme might be coming up?
Yes. No, I'm making progress.
All right, cool.
But
Maybe
yeah, I have a joke with some friends that they're like, "So what? This thing you're working on, like, how far along are you?" The answer is always 60%
right.
until it's done. You're like, "Oh no, it's coming out next week."
Well, just for reference, when I was working on my EP, my 4-song album a few years ago, the engineer, this is a reflection of Virgo 3, the engineer literally kicked me out of the mixing room because I was getting so fixated on like choosing the right vocal take out of like 6, and like, oh, can you move over this tiny second? Oh, that note's wrong. That he was like, get out of here. Oh, shit, you're not allowed in here anymore. So it was me trying to like rub a hole in the paper of my own album. And
Right. Yeah.
finally I had to surrender and just allow the process to happen. And it ended up turning out pretty well.
Mhm.
So I think that might be some of the things that we're having to figure out when we go through here. Jared, let's talk a little bit about one of two things. We could go over to the last quarter moon here and start wrapping things up, or we could talk a little bit about the Sephira potentially, and if we have thoughts on that. Just one thing to add to the full moon is that we do have a Kabbalistic, a Hermetic Kabbalistic Sephira, which is like an energy center related to the tens and the last decans of the mutable signs, which is called Malkuth. Which from my understanding, which is admittedly limited, but it's the Sephira of manifestation. It's related to the earth and the earthly manifestation of, the tree of life. Everything's funneling into like the making this real, whether it's the dream or the material project. Do you have any thoughts on Malkuth or things to add with that?
I will say it does feel coming into the conversation, I was like, I don't know. But after talking about all this stuff for a while, it feels more resonant. Having really dug into this dichotomy of material and spiritual, my understanding of, all my understanding of Kabbalah is that it goes through, it kind of goes in one year out the other. And I always feel like I have like momentary glimpses of some kind of knowledge or understanding or awareness, and then it just sort of dissipates.
Sure.
Which so Malkuth, I have understood to represent it's called the kingdom, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So it is really like the material plane on which we live, what we can see with and hear with our eyes and ears, right? Which is nonetheless the sort of recipient of all the other sephirot, and everything passes through all these other spheres of emanation before coming here, or maybe simultaneously with, or I don't know metaphysically how that's supposed to work per se, but
Yeah,
it feels related to Virgo 3 particularly.
Yeah, it feels like the culmination, right, of all processes, of all spiritual processes, of all, all of the different spiritual manifestations, like for example, like you've got Gabura, which is related to limitations, being balanced by Chesed, which is limitlessness of loving kindness or something of that nature. And you've got those things coming together in the middle Sephira of Tiferet, which is balance. But all of those things are flowing into this this Malkuth, which was from my understanding, is not even related to a spiritual center. It's all about physical manifestation. And what I find really interesting is that there's different occult practitioners that go different directions on the tree. Like either they're thinking about starting in Malkuth and going up to a more like almost like a Kundalini, going up the energy tree, or like drawing down these spiritual energies to the physical realm. But I think it's actually both. I don't think it has to be one or the other, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's move on. We've got on the screen, I have here the last quarter moon on March the 25th, which is another sort of turning point within this lunar cycle. We've got the moon at 4 degrees of Capricorn and the sun at 4 degrees of Aries. So we have already moved through our spring equinox that's happening roughly on the 19th of March, 19th or 20th there. And I wanted to just touch on this briefly because there's some interesting things that are happening that will, when we're looking at a full moon, we can see what could potentially happen, or get some themes that could happen as the lunar cycle completes. So what I'm looking at here with the square is that we have the sun in its exaltation, but the moon in its exile, right? So we may be feeling, the first decan of Aries to me is this, like, it's a Mars decan, and it's all about separating from the collective to infuse into a individual point of consciousness, right? To create sovereignty is the word that keeps coming back to me. Whereas the moon is in the decan of Capricorn here is really about, it's the Two of Pentacles, which is really about balancing the pros and cons of a physical location. So the theme,
like, do I want to set up my castle here?
Yeah, exactly. Like, where do I want to rule? Like, where do I want to become a sovereign, individual? Where's the kingdom going to be located? So, once we get into, the balance of the dream versus the reality, maybe there's a change that happens, and we're really trying to weigh what the next stages are. The other thing I wanted to point out that I think is really fascinating, I'm really excited about, is as the last quarter moon is manifesting, Jupiter is going to be making what's called its heliacal rise when it's 15 degrees away from the sun. So this harkens back to Jupiter's Cazimi moment on March the 5th, where we had a Jupiter conjoining with the sun, which is a super powerful manifestation portal. Can't even say it with a straight face. I sort of hate that word. I'm sorry. I just have it's overused in the metaphysical community. Although there are certain circumstances where it's appropriate, it's not appropriate for every single thing. But I do think that in that case, I'll allow it. like everybody needs my permission. I'm just laughing at my own ego here.
Well, it's funny because you're using the word in a particular way to refer to a particular moment, right, where I actually at least understand what you're getting at.
Yeah.
I feel like usually if I encounter people talking about portals on Twitter or whatever, it's just some kind of like absurd like numerological thing,
right? 100%.
Where it's extremely unclear. It's like portal to where? To what? What are you talking? And it's always just like generally
to another dimension,
something high,
of course,
which itself means nothing to me. So
right.
But in this case, we're talking about the conjoining of the sun and Jupiter, which sort of opens something within each of us.
Yeah.
And within our lives. So it's like there's an opening or there's a doorway. And whereas it's like to Jupiter.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. And I think the other time frame that it's appropriate to use that word isn't during eclipses, because I do think that eclipses are energy points where the north node and the south node were thought of as gateways or doorways to birth, death, you know, alternate dimension type of experiences. So I think it is appropriate when we're talking about that with an eclipse. But what we're looking at on March 25th here is that Jupiter is at 19 degrees of Pisces with the Sun at 4 degrees of Aries. And that 15 degree of separation is when Jupiter becomes visible once again. So all of the manifestation work that we've been doing behind the scenes, we may be really starting to see the visible, you know, real, tangible dream starting to manifest. Whether we're successful or not, that remains to be seen. But I do think this will be a really important point. And there's different astrologers they disagree about what the degree of separation is. I use the 15 degree arc of separation that is standardized in Decanic George's book, Astrology and the Authentic Self. But other astrologers potentially use 12 degrees, I think, for Jupiter sometimes too. So a technical detail, but
is there a standard of when Jupiter will be like literally visible, or is that variable depending on the time of year?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure.
Yeah.
The one person that I trust with this is an astrologer friend in Australia named Shu Yap, and she lives out on a farm with very little light pollution, and she's told me about the various different distances. I think she talks about Jupiter as 12 degrees. I know that she uses like 8 to 10 degrees for Venus, but we're splitting hairs here.
Yeah.
We're going down the Virgo rabbit holes. But I think that within these few days, Jupiter will be becoming visible, and we're going to be able to see some actual literal manifestations of the seeds that we planted at the Jupiter Cazimi on the 5th of March.
Especially because it's now going to be a morning star.
Yeah, right. As the Jupiter morning star is a much more comfortable position for Jupiter being of the diurnal sect, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a hope. That is a condition of hope, I think. That gives me a little bit of hope with a really powerful Jupiter manifesting here.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of just going through a couple days here, and we're getting to the end. Thank you all for hanging with us, those who are going on the deep dive with us here today. My show is not for the short of attention span. Or if it is,
it's not a TikTok.
Right, it's not a TikTok show, which is cool. I mean, I've seen other people recently on social media being like, "Hey, you know, sometimes to get to the core and essence of something, you can't really describe it all in just a 30-second video." And there's so what I'm seeing here on the 27th is we've got Mercury is going to finally move out of its fall and exile in Pisces and gain some dignity in Aries here, moving towards its Cazimi moment that we'll see on the 2nd of April. So some of the communication may start to flow after Jupiter makes its reveal. And then the other thing that we're seeing here on the 28th is that Venus-Saturn conjunction that we were talking about, where this is the moment that Venus gets out of that malefic enclosure that we were talking about, kind of the resolution potentially. And with Venus making a conjunction to Saturn, Saturn always brings some kind of resolution. It castrates things into matter. It brings either a happy ending or a challenging ending. It's binding us to something. So some kind of resolution, I think, is coming at this moment. The last thing I'll say is that we've got Venus hitting the bending of the nodes here a few days later on the 30th, which we briefly touched on. So some kind of transition and choice that is needing to be made related to Venus topics in your life. Mm-hmm. And I touched on this on my March forecast, so I'm not going to go into too much depth here. You can view that replay on my YouTube channel. Um, and then we'll get to the next new moon on April the 1st. So this is going to happen at 11 degrees of Aries. So a new that is the exaltation decan of the sun. So being able to create your own sovereignty, your own sense of being able to guide your own ship of your own life, which I think is I'm really actually looking forward to this new moon. I think it'll feel like we have a lot more agency after having to surrender and submit to things that may or may not be in our control. Yeah, I think that's about what I've got. And again, the Mars Saturn conjunction is on the 4th of April, and then Mars will be at the bending of the nodes on the 5th. So choices in the Mars ruled area of your life as well. Mm-hmm. All right, Jared, that's what we've got for the astrology. Let's talk animal and I-Ching for a minute, and then we'll wrap this up, put a bow on it. We'll let you get back to your obsessive mixing. No, I'm just messing with you. Yeah, I think that Jared and I are both, I think, guilty of similar perfectionism, but this is why we understand each other as well, and have sympathy and compassion for our process.
I think it's interesting to see your Jupiter in Virgo versus my Venus in Virgo.
Right.
It is pretty different, because for you, it's I think a lot more about wanting to make sure you extrapolate on everything that can be extrapolated on. Mm-hmm. For me, I think it's more of a sort of traditional, like, keep polishing the thing until you've accidentally polished it to dust, you know. Sure. Or at least that's the pitfall.
Yeah. Well,
although you were sharing stories about erasing through your paper, so
it's the same energy, yeah. You know. It really is, and I think that it's funny to see that your Virgo energy, because we both have, like, you know, detrimented or exiled benefics, right? So we're trying to create something good, but in a way that is not normally the way that planet would prefer us to do it. Like in the Venus's case, it would prefer balance, harmony, acceptance, allowing it to come to us. And in Jupiter's case, it would be more about faith, you know, and like saying, okay, I accept this, versus like continuing to polish the turd. You know, like, hopefully we haven't created that today. Hopefully we've you know, polished a beautiful gemstone for all of you to be able to pass on to your descendants over time with this wisdom and knowledge.
This YouTube video is our legacy.
That's right. We'll pass it on for generations to come. So, Jared, the hexagram that we got here was number 30, which roughly translates to radiance, the clinging, fire, brilliance, interdependence, shedding light on things, enlightenment, and clarity. That's the one I underlined specifically, was getting clear on something. And we have one changing line that says, and I quote, "Confused footsteps. If one has respect, no blame." So you and I were talking earlier about waking up from sleep in a dream state, which I think is a really, that really resonates with me, with like super heavy Pisces placements. And then we have a full moon in Virgo. It says, oh hey, here's the reality of this dream that you've been living in, this dream state, right? Mm-hmm. I'll just read some of my notes. Groggy in the first morning hours, sorting out possibilities, gaining perspective and clarity before taking action or making progress. The necessity to remain composed and proceed carefully. Pay attention to the details! ! Because you may fudge some details that are actually very important when you're trying to manifest the dream. Not like us, where we get maybe fixated on things that potentially aren't important, right? In our art, they're important to us, but maybe not to other people.
That moment, just then, there were loud noises on both of our ends. That was very weird. I could hear cars in the background for you.
Yeah,
a motorcycle or something, and then some heavy object dropped.
I live at a very busy intersection, so you'll hear
Yeah.
various people, you know,
Yeah.
by.
Sorry, that just was weird.
um, so the other thing I was writing down is that we may only be at the beginning of this project or this process or this dream, and it's important to respect the complexities that are involved within it. Sometimes one of the negative parts of Pisces is potentially spiritually bypassing something that is more complex and trying to just, pass it off as one unified thing when there are actually different facets of it that we have to pay attention to. Moving forward with caution, avoiding overwhelm and confusion. Let yourself wake up a little bit first. You're not going to go run a marathon the second you jump out of bed. You got to get your coffee or whatever it is, drink a glass of water, you got to go take a piss, whatever it is that gets you ready for the day. Maybe do some yoga,
And
exercise.
hopefully you've been training for months before you run a marathon. Not just like, well, I better drink a glass of water at least.
Glass of water, I'm going to run 26 miles today for the first time ever. That's sort of what it feels like in Pisces season. Oh man, let's go run the marathon. Because I just believe I can.
You're fine.
And I wrote down, have beginner's mind, have the humility and openness to be able to realize that you might not know everything that you need, and let it come to you. I think this is one of the beautiful things about Virgo is saying, hey, I'm willing and open to learning more about the process, the humility that comes in Virgo, rather than saying, oh, I already know this, I'm going to be closed off to this. This is changing to hexagram 56. So we have this energy of clarity that's going to help move us towards this condition, 56, the wanderer, traveling, unsettled, tentative, uncertain, in transition, exploring, trying new experiences. So we may not get the final result potentially where we say, oh, everything is resolved now, we may be just at another stage of the journey, because I don't think that Pisces and Virgo or any mutable sign is really, their strong point isn't stability, right? I don't think that's not necessarily what we're getting to.
Yeah. Consistency.
Yeah, it's really about change. It's change between the seasons and being able to get to a turning point. So it's really a turning point that we're looking at. The thing I wanted to explain about 56 is 56 really, there's a story about 56 that talks about a king that is trying to move his nomadic kingdom or his tribe or whatever, however they describe it in the I-Ching, to a new location. And he's visiting a foreign land, and he ends up having to adjust to the customs and circumstances of this new land. And there's a cautionary tale in there where he ends up dancing for the new king's wife, and she takes an interest in him, and the new king is very upset about this and has all of the people that are traveling murdered. So my advice is this: don't do a sexy dance for somebody that you don't know or for their partner. I'm looking at you, aligning light astrology. Sorry, we're wilding here, as Tanya says. And then, but just sorry, I gotta compose myself once again. We're getting to the end of my blood sugar, where things tend to get punchy. That's my weakness. Is when I get hungry, I get a little bit loopy. Blame my Taurus moon for that. Anyway, help me out here, Jared. What can we do when we're in a strange foreign place and where you don't know the customs and the new rules associated with that place? What do you think we can do to navigate
Head
that?
down, crazy? Pay attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think humility is a good go-to word.
Yeah. Humility, pay attention to your circumstances, respect the customs of the new environment and circumstance you find yourself in with beginner's mind, because if you try to do things the way that you've always done them, it could lead to a conflict because you are in a vulnerable position as a traveler, as a foreigner, as somebody who doesn't necessarily have the benefit of familiarity, right?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how much this divination is like tapping into the transitory qualities that have been the topic of this entire conversation.
Absolutely.
Um,
Ephemeral full moon, for
mhm.
sure. And with that being said, the animal that we pulled for this full moon is the jellyfish. Um, jellyfish, many of them don't have brains, so maybe we need to turn our brains off a little bit and just
I think
float
we've
with
succeeded
the
recently.
current. Yeah, we got to that point
Yes,
there, dog.
few minutes.
So I wrote down, stop forcing things, go with the flow, get back to basics, let things happen in their own time, stay calm, exclamation point. I wanted to be emphatic about staying calm in my notes here. Have patience in the process. Be transparent with your emotions. Many jellyfish are, you can see right through them. And so I think that being clear about how you feel about things can help, communication being the key. And then just aligning with the current, floating with the streams of your life, and utilizing the power of acceptance, I think can really get you to a good place. I get the jellyfish quite a bit for these live streams. It's an animal that keeps coming up over and over again, along with the camel. I think those two animals, the power of acceptance and being prepared, and adapting, can be really great guides for us.
Yeah. I just thought it was so funny because you shared this like page out of this book, this reading for the jellyfish, and just like even just glancing at it, like if you've studied astrology, you glance at it, and you're just like Pisces. I
Yeah,
mean, it's like the
yeah,
number of Pisces keywords that were on this page of this book was like pretty astonishing.
yeah.
Um, it's like trusting, non-resistant, peaceful, joy, comforting, easygoing, go with the flow, flexible,
Mm.
uh, all of this stuff. Not to mention, it's an aquatic animal. Um,
Well, and this is the beauty of doing, what I call integrative divination, is when you pull things from multiple systems. Oftentimes, if you are getting into the correct oracular space, you will find the connections between those things, and they will affirm each other. So this to me is just an affirmation of what we've been talking about. And Rachel in the chat is pointing out, you can easily miss a jellyfish and get a nasty sting. So I think that actually reflects the hexagram 56 of saying, hey, respect the waters that you're in. If you this is your first time in the ocean, you better pay attention if there's a jellyfish around you, or you could really run into some trouble.
and
Um,
definitely don't do a sexy dance for a jellyfish.
yeah, don't do a sexy dance for a jellyfish, or they will sting the shit
I
out of
think
you.
what in more slightly more serious on a slightly more serious note,
Yeah,
it does make me think that when you're looking at the chart of this full moon, the whole chart is very reliant on Jupiter in Pisces.
yeah,
And so what this sort of supporting divination provides me is like that extra push that someone like me needs, someone who's very Virgo, as Virgo rising with multiple planets there, a little bit of a nudge, like it's okay. Like
hmm
let yourself lean on the Pisces. Um, let yourself have some kind of trust and faith, and more importantly, that flexibility of going with the flow. That's what is going to be necessary and needed and help carry you through this moment.
yeah.
Um, that's what I take from that.
Well, Jared, I'll tell you, I've been pulling the Ten of Cups, which is related to Pisces 3, multiple times in the last 2 weeks,
Well,
which is reminding me to surrender and release the how. put the intention out there and just release the how and say, we're co-creating together. Like, and it's important to not feel like we have to be like Hermes stirring the drink every second of the day, right? Right? Like, we add too many ingredients and we keep messing with something when it's supposed to simmer, like a stew or a soup, and we can ruin our creation. But if we just do what we need to do in the moment and then let the natural process play out, we may have something worth consuming or passing on, or that will be nourishing moving forward. All right, my friend, I think we did it. I think we got to the end here. This was amazing, Jared.
Yeah, really fun.
Mercurius George, this is so much fun. I'm so glad that I have you to talk to about these things, and that you've embraced the dark side here of metaphysical, practitioner.
I thought I embraced the Schwartz, but
embracing the Schwartz.
Accidentally embraced the dark side.
I don't know. It might not be the dark side. It might actually be the light or whatever.
I would hope so.
Yeah. So, but it's always great to speak with you. For those of you who are new to Jared's work, you can find him at mercuriusgeorge.com, MERCURIUS George.com with no O.
Thank you.
Okay. And again, if you want to support the work that I do here, you can please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, sign up for the Decans of Aries and the Spring Bundle. Let's go on a journey together. Support both Jared and I through scheduling a reading, and be kind and be gentle with yourself over these next few days and weeks ahead, and practice your good self-care and get into the flow. We've got some really nice comments coming in, Jared, with people that are enjoying this jellyfish meditative, mesmerizing symbol. Being able, they're saying thanks to you and how helpful this was, and really appreciate your wisdom. Tanya's talking about peeps in the chili pot, which is a reference to The Good Place. So if you don't know about that, just go check out Chidi and the chili. You'll get a nice laugh from that. Yeah. So lots of good compliments
that's a good character to have in mind.
Oh yeah, right.
Chidi from The Good Place.
Did you watch the whole series? Did you get?
I have to watch the last season. I haven't watched it yet.
Okay. Do you know the Chidi in the chili pot?
I don't know that. But he's just such a good mental image for over Virgoing,
so
and having no faith,
Yeah.
And he's constantly getting himself in situations where if he would let go, everything would work out. But because he can't let go, this is how I remember it anyway.
Absolutely. Well, the peeps in the chili pot is that he basically starts not giving a fuck about anything, and starts mixing peeps in the chili pot with his psychotic break, whatever. It's very funny.
Maybe he goes a little too far. He overlearns the lesson.
Yeah, potentially. But yes, go check it out. The time you're saying no spoilers. Sorry, I spoiled it. Anyway, thank you so much, everyone that has been here today. Remember, I'll leave you with this thought. Don't do a sexy dance for a stranger's partner if you're in a strange land. And again, be kind to one another. Be kind to yourself. Make sure that you go with the flow, and we'll all get through this together. So thanks again, Jared. Thank you, everybody in the chat today, and I will see you the next time. Take care, friends.
Bye.